It's unfortunately the usual practice for us during the wartime. There were periods when they were hitting the residential areas, killing children and women and civilians almost every day. Now, after the several weeks of calm period, more or less, they resumed today in the night. It was 4 a.m. when the whole Ukraine, was hearing the blasts. I was hearing it in Kiev. And yes, you are talking about the city of Uman with 23 dead and 4 children including. And there was a city of Dnipro already, which was suffering the same attacks. And 1 woman was killed and 1 child. So this is what they are having as their usual practice. No military object anywhere near this residential area. Just nothing. Just residential areas, multi-story buildings with civilians sleeping. And that's what their usual practice. That's what they have all the war. That's what their barbaric acts. That's why Putin was called to arrest by ICC, because that is awful. That is terrible.
Yes, not too far from the capital of Kyiv, just south of Kyiv, the city Uman. It comes as Ukraine's defense minister is weighing in on the expected Ukrainian counteroffensive, saying this, and I'm quoting him now: "As soon as it is God's will, the weather, and the commander's decision, we will do it." How high are expectations right now for Ukraine to show military results in this anticipated new assault?
I would also add to what to the arguments of Minister of Defense, providing that we have enough weapon to start the counteroffensive, because when you need an artillery systems and enough ammunition to start the counter artillery battery fight before the counteroffensive, and then you use your manpower, and they need armored vehicles and tanks, Western type tanks, which were started to receive from the Western states, from the European states, but not in enough amounts. So this is also another component, a very necessary component. Without each, we will not be able to start the counteroffensive.
The NATO Secretary General says the allies have so far provided almost all of the results, all of the weapons that Ukraine needs. But you're suggesting you need more from the NATO allies?
Look, Wolf, when we receive the weapon, we do not store them somewhere in the warehouses, whatever. We immediately use them on the battlefield. And Ukraine is withstanding for more than 14 months, and we're having hard times in the east of Ukraine. We're defending each and every inch of Ukrainian territory. So you cannot just tell, I've provided you some percentage and you rest assured you will not get anything else. We need the weapon. With the intensity Russians are attacking us, with the intensity Russians are bombarding our cities, with the intensity Russia is firing our front line, we need still more. And yes, we need artillery, we need weapons, tanks and armored vehicles. We need air defense systems in order to protect the inland Ukraine. Look, 23 missiles were hit this night, 21 were intersected, but still 2 hit the target. We need more and more short-range, medium-range and long-range air defense systems in order to protect the whole territory of Ukraine.
On a different issue, Mr. Zhovkwa, I want to raise the issue of what President Zelensky says as far as China is concerned. He says he appealed to the Chinese President Xi Jinping to help return the thousands, he says, of Ukrainian children who have been forcibly deported, taken away from their parents, forcibly deported to Russia. This is seen as a war crime by the International Criminal Court. What do you need to see now from President Xi?
Yes, my president raised this issue during this 1-hour talk with President Xi. Among other topics, territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, including Crimea. Among topics like, protecting the nuclear power plant in Zaporizhia, because China is, asking not to blackmail all of us by nuclear weapons and by nuclear blackmailing. That's what Russia is doing, capturing the Zaporizhia. But one of the topics, like you are rightfully saying, is, yes, helping us to have back our deported children, thousands of them. Right, you are. We don't know any whereabouts of these children. They are somewhere deep in Russia. No one knows. They are. They have no care, etc. So yes, we are raising this issue with President Xi, as we are raising this issue with our international leaders and organizations. This is what the most terrible thing when you fight with children, when you have a war against the children. That's the most barbaric act you can even imagine. So we are counting on the support of President Xi in this regard.
Well, let's hope something happens and those kids can go back to their parents. Thank you so much, Igor Zhovkwa in Kyiv. Thanks so much for joining us. Right now, I want to get more on what's going on in Ukraine. Our experts are standing by. And Jill Doherty, let me start with you. What do you make of the timing of this latest very deadly Russian assault on civilian targets in Ukraine?
It's hard, Wolf, I think, to say precisely why they did it on this day, but they're obviously upping the ante yet again. And I think one of the more significant things is actually what's happening back in Russia. Today, President Putin ordered that they create museums all over Russia. And these museums are going to glorify the heroic deeds, as he puts it, of the Russian soldiers. So this is, to me, an indication that Putin has no intention of stopping. In fact, what he is going to be doing is essentially, propagandizing children for the next 20 years by creating this. They're changing the educational system, et cetera. So he is, if anything, he is digging in and trying to convince his own people that this is what Russia's mission in the world should be. It's really perverse.
And General Wesley Clark is joining us right now as well, the former NATO Supreme Allied Commander. General Clark, we're showing our viewers, I don't know if you can see it, these live pictures of this residential apartment building that was targeted by the Russians just south of Kyiv in Uman, Ukraine, killing a lot of men, women, and children. You see rescue workers on the scene. They're trying to find out if anyone is still alive inside that building. It comes at a time when Ukraine has cautioned that it won't announce when its counteroffensive will begin. But what do you expect?
I think that we may not know exactly when the counteroffensive does begin, hopefully. Hopefully it will begin with partisan activity behind the lines, opening up avenues of approach for the Ukrainian main forces, pinning down Russian reserves, blocking roads. I mean, this is pretty standard, but Ukrainians have an incredible capacity to do this if they choose to do this. And then you'll see it moving forward in a reconnaissance-led attack, I think. But the Ukrainians are going to be very wary when they move this forward because they know that they've got to make a dramatic impact here. They don't want to run up with all their equipment up front, suffer some losses, get thrown back, and have the world say, oh, my God, it's all over. No, they're going to gnaw their way through these Russian defenses when they go. And they may be from a different direction than we expect. I mean, everybody's looking south. It might be the northeast. It might be south of Bakhmut. We don't know exactly where they're going to go, but they are going to move with reconnaissance. They're going to move with concentration of power, and they're going to be certain that they can protect their flanks. They know there's a Russian counteroffensive force out there, might be 20, might be 40 battalion tactical groups with a lot of air power that could come in and strike them. They've got to have the anti-air defense, and as the diplomatic advisor said, they got to have enough artillery ammunition to win a counterfire fight when they once close in with the enemy. They've got to have the artillery through that.
This is clearly a critical moment that's unfolding right now. General Clark, thank you very much. Jill Doherty, thanks to you as well. Coming up, the new move from the Florida legislature that could signal Governor Ron DeSantis' intention in the race for the White House. Plus, the new report detailing the failures leading to the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and the growing fears it could happen here in the United States again. Tonight, the Florida legislature has cleared a key potential roadblock for Ron DeSantis, ensuring he will not have to resign the governorship of Florida if he decides to run for president. It's the clearest sign yet of his national ambitions. Our political experts are here to discuss. Jeff Zeleny, this move comes during a week when DeSantis has clearly been on the defensive over his fight with Disney, even from within his own party. Listen to how some key Republicans are talking about this feud. Listen.
I think the governor should sit down with him. I don't think the idea of building a prison next to a place that you bring your family is the best idea.
I do worry that if this happens too many times, businesses that are thinking about coming to Florida are saying, maybe we don't want to go there because if we get into a firestorm with them politically, they're going to come after our business.
Well, look, this was once sort of an example of strength for the Florida governor. I was at his swearing in just about 3.5 months ago on the steps of the Florida Capitol, and he talked about this fight with Disney. He was using that as a calling card for Republican voters across the country as an example of his strength, going after, he said, Florida is a place where woke goes to die. Well, it's really remarkable how much has changed and how different he looks now heading into May than he did in January. And the Disney feud and fight is sort of exhibit A of that. Republicans inside Florida and outside Florida are going increasingly concerned, really from all wings of the party, that he is going after this specific company, and it looks like a vendetta. And it's not going so well for him. Frankly, Disney has been in Florida a long time, more than 50 years, and they'll likely be there longer than he is. So this is an example of all of his opponents are sort of piling onto this. We heard it from Nikki Haley this week. We've heard it from Donald Trump as well. So it's unclear how any of this is helping his presidential campaign, which even before it starts is floundering a bit.
Let me get Scott Jennings into this. Do your fellow Republicans, Scott, the Republicans that you're talking to, think DeSantis has stumbled in this fight with Disney? Is this hurting him with donors or endorsements?
Well, a lot of folks I'm talking to are looking at the polling, and I'll take the other side of the coin here. You've got the Harvard-Harris poll, you've got the Reuters-Ipsos poll. Vast majorities of Republican voters think it's right for Ron DeSantis to be taking on Disney. And the thing he's trying to communicate is that when he gets into these fights, he doesn't walk away from them. He's going to continue to communicate that. That's part of who he is. That's his whole identity. And he's not going to let it go. And I think he believes he's got the grassroots of the party behind him, even if a few Washington politicians are telling him to stop.
You know, these are key Republican leaders, not just Washington politicians. David Axelrod, has the fight with Disney turned what many saw as a political strength for DeSantis, that he's a fighter, into a potential weakness, possibly seen as a bully?
Yeah, well, look, I agree with Jeff on this. The interesting thing about this is kind of a microcosm of the battle within the Republican Party. I think a lot of establishment Republicans, not just Washington Republicans, but establishment Republicans across the country, believe that state governments, federal governments shouldn't be pushing businesses around, and certainly not pushing them around for expressing a point of view, which is all that Disney did, was express a point of view. And they sort of bested DeSantis in the sort of game of legal maneuvering. He was angry about that, and so he threw a fit about it. I don't think he looked particularly strong doing that. I don't think he's looked strong generally lately. He was asked a question about his sliding poll numbers in Japan the other day and reacted in a way that looked like something out of a Disney movie. It was just really, really strange. Meanwhile, his legislature is considering, in addition to this legislation to make it harder to track who he's met with, where he's traveling, harder to track a range of things in state government, all apparently to protect him in this governor's race. He's behaving more in Florida. He's behaving more like Huey Long than anything else, but he's not looking particularly strong doing it. It's early. He could come back. He's still someone who a lot of Republicans support as an alternative to Donald Trump. But I'd be concerned if I were in his camp.
You know, Jeff Zeleny, DeSantis' legislative allies back in Florida, he's in Jerusalem, Israel right now. They've also advanced a bill barring requests for records about DeSantis' travel, a move which appears to be an attempt to protect DeSantis from negative news stories or opposition research. So much for being the Sunshine State, shall we say.
Without a doubt. I mean, as David was just saying, and Wolf, you're right. I mean, these proposed laws, which of course will pass because he controls the Florida legislature, are designed to sort of mask his travel and not have. Florida famously has some of the most open public records in the country, and this would change that. But the reason that this is underway is because Donald Trump and others have been sort of going after him, pointing out to Florida voters and voters elsewhere, how much he's been out of the state. In fact, he's out of the state, or the country in this case, more than he's been in the office in Tallahassee. But look, this is not going to strengthen a potential presidential bid. This may sort of keep some negative stories away from him. But what his focus obviously needs to be, and his advisors know this, is sort of rebooting here before he has an announcement, which we believe will be either late May or early June.
All right, we shall watch. Guys, thank you very, very much. Up next, the Federal Reserve releases a scathing report on mismanagement over at Silicon Valley Bank before its epic collapse. Plus, the fragile ceasefire in Sudan is already in danger, with reports of fighting emerging from the conflict zone.
This week on The Assignment with me, Audie Cornish.
There's a reason folks in intelligence told me never use TikTok and don't let your kids use TikTok. Tracks your movement, facial recognition technology.
Anchor and CNN Chief National Security Correspondent Jim Sciutto.
Beyond what's public, what you've posted on Facebook, social media, etc., goes into a vat of information, which I am sure China has highly collated.
Listen to The Assignment with me, Audie Cornish, on Spotify.
Shares of First Republic Bank plummeted today amid new fears the ailing financial institution could collapse at any moment. CNN's Jeremy Diamond is joining us from the White House with details. Jeremy, is the White House now considering a bailout?
Well, First Republic Bank has been in dire straits all week after the bank stock started crumbling earlier this week after the bank reported that its deposits fell by 41% in the first quarter. Just today, its stock has fallen 43%. But despite that, a source familiar with the government's thinking tells us that there is no new effort to coordinate a rescue of First Republic Bank. Instead, what we are seeing is that the FDIC, which is responsible for supervising the bank, they've been coordinating private sector talks about a potential sale or another solution for this bank. But in terms of the White House or Treasury Department officials, they're certainly monitoring this situation. But we're not seeing the level of engagement that we saw from senior officials in March. That's when the Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen helped to privately coordinate an effort by 11 of the U.S.'s largest banks to bail out First Republic Bank, a $30 billion bailout at the time. And that's because at the time, officials saw a need to stabilize the banking sector. But today, one source tells me that they do not see a broader risk of contagion with the banks. Now, at the same time, today, we're also learning more about the collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. And that's because the Federal Reserve has released its highly anticipated post-mortem of this situation. And interestingly, in the report, the Federal Reserve not only faults the bank's senior executives, but it also blames itself. This is a quote from Michael Barr, the Federal Reserve's vice chair for supervision. He writes, quote, "Silicon Valley Bank failed because of a textbook case of mismanagement by the bank. Its senior leadership failed to manage basic interest rate and liquidity risk, and Federal Reserve supervisors failed to take forceful enough action." Now, Barr also called for strengthening the Federal Reserve's regulatory and supervisory authorities, and so we could see this report potentially setting up new regulatory actions to strengthen that kind of supervision going forward. Wolf?
Yeah. All right, Jeremy Diamond of the White House, thank you. Now to the debt ceiling standoff up on Capitol Hill. The House Speaker, Kevin McCarthy, says he still hasn't heard from the White House after House Republicans passed a bill raising the nation's borrowing limit. Let's go to our chief congressional correspondent, Manu Raju. He's joining us from Capitol Hill. Manu, does the House passing a bill make a default less likely or more likely?
That is still the question that is dominating these hallways in the Capitol, and no one has a clear answer to that, because even in the aftermath of the House Republicans narrowly passing their bill after months of internal work, getting their conference in line and losing just 4 Republican votes and passing it on the narrowest of margins, Democrats say that does not matter. They say simply there should be no spending cuts attached to any sort of debt limit increase, that the debt limit should be raised without any conditions whatsoever. That is the position of the White House, of Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer, House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries, who told me today that he is supporting the White House's position, though there are some moderate Democrats who are breaking ranks. One of them, Jared Golden of Maine, telling me earlier today that he believes President Biden should, in fact, sit down with Kevin McCarthy, negotiate the debt ceiling increase, try to come to some sort of compromise position. And that is something that is voiced, too, by some Senate Republican deal makers like Mitt Romney.
Well, as was often the case, we simply don't know what Russia thinks it was aiming at, if indeed it was too concerned about where its missiles landed. But in 2 specific instances, there were losses of life. A total of 23 missiles launched, Ukraine says, 21 of which were intercepted, but the 2 that got through caused horrifying loss of life. Like you said, 23 dead in the incident in Oman. You can see live pictures there where rescuers are combing through the rubble, still trying to get to the lower floors where they believe potentially a boy and a girl may be still trapped. Their parents have survived, but they can't reach their children through their cell phones. Just one of a number of horrifying stories from, yet again, brutality by Russian missiles.
As usual, the terror comes at night as Ukraine tries to sleep. A mother described hearing the missile roar in and throwing her children into the bathtub under pillows. Another filmed the seconds afterwards.
My God, I never thought this would happen. A rocket hit our building. I am covered in blood. I don't know. My windows were blown out. This is the kids' room, but we're all alive. We're just all covered in blood. God, we don't have windows, anything. I'm so afraid.
As usual, as Dawn clarifies the victims, in this apartment block in Uman, it was only those hoping to escape the war.
We felt the impact, heard the explosion. We were on a balcony till 7 a.m. All the rooms were full of smoke.
The rubble hiding some of the agony, but also surrendering some throughout the day. This body removed hours later. Outside, the rows of ordinary lives overturned in an instant. That morning, as tension around a possible Ukrainian counter-offensive grows, Russia fired 23 missiles. Only 2 got past Ukraine's NATO-improved air defences. But lest you think the horror of Uman an error, similar strikes hit buildings in Dnipro and also killed a 31-year-old woman and her 2-year-old. They had fled the war to this, her parents' suburban home, but its savagery found them. Kiev is hoping to turn the tables, slowly taking out valuable Russian targets in the south, like this radar system. With social media videos fueling fears, like this one, apparently showing a Russian ammo depot hit in occupied areas that Ukraine will soon assault. Kiev very silent about when and where they will attack, which made this day's comments by the defense minister about their high readiness particularly intriguing.
In the global sense, we are ready in a high percentage mode. The next question is up to the general staff. As soon as it is God's will, the weather, and the commander's decision, we will do it.
Ukraine's need to move mounting as Russia lashes out.
Now, I hate to say it, Wolf, but as we've seen a pause from Russia comparatively over the past weeks, we may see an uptick in savage missile attacks like that, potentially as it's Moscow's not favourite, but often used way of retaliating against Ukraine if it sees losses on the battlefield. And we may see some of that in the days or weeks ahead. You heard the defence minister there suggesting that they are at a pretty high stage of readiness for a counter-offensive. Odd comments to hear, because Ukraine's been so utterly keen to leave no indication as to when this long-awaited offensive may indeed start. So the fact we're hearing that sort of detailed comment may tally with what we've been seeing along the front lines here, that certainly tension, if not movement, if not actual activity related to this counter-offensive is already underway. Such a vital moment for Ukraine, but one too where Russia is still indiscriminately taking the lives of children. Wolf?
Nick Payton-Walsh in Ukraine for us in the war zone. Stay safe over there, Nick. Thank you very much. Joining us now, the Ukrainian ambassador to the United States, Oksana Markarova. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us. I want to tell you, we're looking at these live pictures right now of rescuers. They're trying to still find missing children among the rubble after this Russian brutal assault on the civilian residential apartment complex. What goes through your mind, Ambassador, seeing yet another deadly Russian strike on civilians?
Good evening, Wolf. Yes, thank you for having me. And it's 429th day and yet another day of horrible war crimes that we have seen throughout this very long, very difficult, full-fledged phase of the war. And it's, again, just another war crime. It breaks my heart to see it every time. I mean, it's not the first time. Unfortunately, it's not the last time. I mean, we have to stop Russia and win this war for them to stop doing this. But, you know, it's heartbreaking to see it. You know, the whole section of the residential building, 27 apartments, 109 people who were registered there, just their life collapsing because somebody decided to hit a missile into a residential block. So again, horrific war crime, yet another sign why we have to liberate all Ukraine, why we need more weapons, why we need more support in order to stop this, because this is something that should not be happening in the middle of Europe in the 21st century. It should not be happening anywhere. And unfortunately, we see the pattern that Russia has been using in all the previous aggression wars, not only in Ukraine now and in Ukraine in 2014, but in Chechnya, in Syria, and in so many places. And it's time for all of us together to stop them.
This comes, Ambassador, as Ukraine's defense minister Reznikov says preparations are nearly complete. He was pretty blunt, nearly complete to launch the highly anticipated military counteroffensive against the Russians. What can Ukraine achieve on the battlefield, Ambassador, in the coming assault?
Well, you know, we during this time, we already liberated 50% or more than 50% of what Russia occupied since February 24th. Some counteroffensives we had before, like in Kharkiv, has been very quick. In Kharkiv Oblast, 6 days. Some, like in Kherson or in Kiev Oblast, took longer. We don't know, but we trust our armed forces that they will do it in the most effective and efficient way. Whether it's going to be one counteroffensive or several operations, really what is important is the goal is to liberate all Ukraine.
Will you also try,
peace and safe.
Ambassador, excuse me for interrupting, will you also try to liberate Crimea?
Well, the end goal is to liberate all Ukraine within our recognized borders. So yes, Crimea is Ukraine. But with regard to this counteroffensive, we're not commenting it until we see it, and it's up to our military commanders how they will do it.
On a different issue, Ambassador, President Zelensky says he urged the Chinese President Xi Jinping to help get back thousands of Ukrainian children forcibly deported, taken away from their parents, forcibly deported by the Russians and sent off to Russia. What specifically do you think President Xi can do to help bring those children home?
Well, first of all, President Zelensky on that call, which is the first call since this phase of the war started, has been very clear about the fact that it's Russia which is an aggressor. It's only Russia which is responsible for this, that Ukraine wants peace, but there will not be any concessions on part of Ukraine, and we all have to adhere to UN Charter. And this crime of forceful transfer of Ukrainian children, for which Putin and Lvova Belova are already under arrest warrants, is, again, yet another horrific crime. So it was a very clear message from President Zelensky to the head of the state of China that, A, we really hope that they will not help in any way Russia, and they would respect the territorial integrity and the UN Charter, which is very important for them according to their position. And they should do everything that they can, given their relations with Russia, in order to convey a strong message to Russia to stop this aggressive war and also to return our children. Whether, President of China will do something or not, we will see. But I think it was very important that President Zelensky was able to say it directly to him.